This week's topic is measurement. This week we're going to be talking about what is measurement, what are some of the ways that psychologists measure variables, and what are some of the questions to ask yourself about what makes for better or worse measurement. So in this video I'm going to talk about what measurement is. A general definition of measurement, and this is sort of adapted from Wikipedia, although this is similar to what a lot of researchers use, would be to define measurement as a procedure for assigning numbers to characteristics of objects or events, which can be compared to other objects or events. In psychology, oftentimes the objects that we're assigning numbers to are people, and then we're going to assign numbers to characteristics of people, like their personalities, or sometimes characteristics that vary within people, like their emotions or how well their memory is working today. And so this process of measurement is a process of assigning numbers to objects or events or characteristics of those objects or events. An important conceptual distinction that's going to matter a lot this week is something I introduced in a previous video, the difference between conceptual and operational variables. So let's review. Conceptual variables are sometimes also called constructs, and you're going to hear that word again when we talk about construct validity. Conceptual variables or constructs are abstract definitions. They're the variables in our theories. Operational definitions, are also sometimes called operational variables or operationalizations, are the procedures we use to measure something. So the relationship between them is a theoretical relationship. It is something that we develop theories about and we test theories about. Scientists propose theories that define constructs and state how those constructs can be measured. So you can really think of measurement as where the rubber hits the road, if the rubber is our theories and the road is our data. So think about something familiar, let's say from physical measurement of temperature. So we have very well-developed theories in physics about what temperature is. It has to do with the kinetic energy of molecules. And we have, based on those theories, different ways to measure the temperatures of different objects. So you can use a mercury or alcohol thermometer. We have a theory that says that the liquid inside will expand as a result of its temperature. You might use color in an astronomy setting, the color of different stars or redshift to understand different properties based on temperature. And so this is an area where we have a theory about what temperature is, and then we can generate all kinds of predictions that help us understand how to measure things. So these measurement theories are proposed, they're based on theories, and if they're more provisional theories where we don't know if they're true or not yet, we test them just like we would test any other theory. Now in psychology, oftentimes our measurement theories are not as well developed as the example I just used, and so many things are in an ongoing process of being refined and improved. Let me give an example of a measurement that we measure a lot in psychology, intelligence. A construct. So intelligence would be the construct. We would have a theory that gives a definition of what intelligence is. So one theoretical definition of intelligence, and there are several, but one that a lot of psychologists use, is that intelligence is a general mental capability that, among other things, involves the ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, learn quickly, and learn from experience. So in this example, intelligence would be the construct. We would have a theory that defines what that construct is, and then based on that theory, we would make decisions about what kinds of tasks or other procedures, other operationalizations, would be good measures of intelligence and what kinds would be not good intelligence measures. So for example, based on that definition, giving people a set of math problems to solve might be a good way to measure intelligence or part of a way to measure intelligence, but measuring how high people can jump would not, because the theory doesn't say that that's supposed to be a manifestation of intelligence. So based on theories, we might make different decisions for different kinds of constructs. So some things might be stable over time. Theory says your intelligence is supposed to be stable over time, and so we would expect measures to have that property. Theory tells us it should be correlated with achievement. Theory tells us it should be negatively associated with dementia, things like that. And when we get in a later video into construct validity, these predictions become quite important. So when you go from a conceptual variable to operationalizations, there's almost never just a one-to-one relationship, just one operationalization. Instead, there's often many different ways we could measure something, and we use different methods, and oftentimes we look for convergence among them. So for example, if we take something like your subjective well-being, how well you're doing psychologically, subjectively, that's a conceptual variable. And then we might propose that there are different ways of measuring that. So we might give a 5-item questionnaire scale, and that might have questions about your well-being. We might count how many times you smile within a laboratory setting while you're being videotaped doing something, and we might take that as a measure, maybe a good one, maybe a not good one, of your overall well-being based on how much you smile in a laboratory setting. We might measure physiological measures like your blood pressure if we have a theory that says that well-being should be associated with blood pressure. So well-being would be the conceptual variable, and these different things, the scale, the count of smiles, the blood pressure, these would be operationalizations. So there are a lot of different ways that psychologists measure things, different types or approaches to measurement. I'm going to briefly go over 3 important categories of them. We're going to go into more depth about them in a future week. So one of these is self-report. Self-report is a very common approach or method of measurement. It's not just one thing. We can use self-report for all kinds of things. Self-report means we ask people verbal questions in a questionnaire or interview, and then they give us an answer. Sometimes they just tell us back in words. Sometimes we do self-reports where we might give them a scale, and we might say, on a scale from 1 to 5, how much do you agree with this statement? Things like that. So some examples where self-report is used. One would be a personality questionnaire. So you might take a questionnaire that says things like, how much do you agree with statements like, I am outgoing, or I am warm and compassionate? And we would have you respond on a scale from 1 to 5, how much do you agree or disagree? And that would be a personality scale. In clinical psychology, we might use something like a symptom checklist. So we might say, have you been feeling the following over the last week? Depressed, unable to function, hard time concentrating, and so forth. And there's about a zillion others. Self-report is super common in psychology. It's something that a lot of areas of psychology use. Sometimes it's used well, sometimes not. We'll get more into how to tell the difference as we go along. A second type of measure would be observation measures. This would be instances where we record observable behaviors or traces of behavior as a way of operationalizing a construct. So a few examples, one of them, which is one of my favorites because it's kind of fun, is something, or well, it's funny, it's cute, is something that's done sometimes to measure children's ability to regulate their emotions and conform to social standards. It's called the disappointing gift task. Yeah, a kid who's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years old to come into the laboratory, you ask them to do some important task for you, and you tell them when you're done, we're going to give you a gift. Kid does the task, you give them a gift, and then let's say it's like a 3-year-old and they open up the box, they're all excited, and it's like a baby rattle or something like that. And then you measure how do they behave? Do they yell and scream and throw it in the corner? Do they do what they've maybe been socialized to do, which is to smile and, oh, thank you very much? So this is an example where researchers actually create a structured setting and then measure, observe, record the behavior in response to it. Another example, this has been used in a lot of psychology research to measure behavior in naturalistic settings, is something called the electronically activated recorder. This is a way of measuring things where people would wear a recording device and then every couple times an hour at random intervals, it'll turn on, grab a 30-second snippet of audio from their environment, and then turn off and keep happening again and again. Of course, people will have consented to have this happen. And so this is a way of recording the audio in people's environments. How often are they talking or in a conversation? When they are, what are they saying? What are they hearing? So forth. Another example, of relatively more recent one, would be collecting traces of behavior through things like social media. So a researcher might scrape tweets off of Twitter in order to analyze the language or the links people are posting or the GIFs that they're posting or things like that as a way of trying to measure something about how they behave in that space. A third big category of measures would be physiological measures. So these are measures where we're recording biological data, and there's all kinds of different physiological measures that are used. So one family of measures is autonomic psychophysiology measures. These are measures that are based on the autonomic nervous system, so things like heart rate, how fast is your heart beating, skin conductance, which is a way of measuring how much a very weak electrical charge is transmitted over the skin, which is a function of how much your sweat glands are operating. So things like that. And if we have a theory that says that in a particular situation, someone is supposed to be having a certain autonomic response, then these might be operationalizations of that autonomic response. A second big category would be brain imaging. An example of this, although there are many different kinds of brain imaging, but one very popular and common one that we do here at the University of Oregon is fMRI, which stands for Functional Magnetic Resonance Imaging, where researchers put someone in essentially a gigantic magnet and they're measuring perturbances in the magnetic field, which are based on how much oxygen is flowing to different parts of the brain. And they can use computer algorithms to turn those perturbances in the magnetic field into an image of where oxygen is flowing in the brain, which is taken as an indication of how active those parts of the brain are because they're metabolizing oxygen. Another example would be gene sequencing. This has become more and more common in recent years, where we try to understand differences between people's genotypes by taking samples of tissue and then sequencing them for the DNA and looking at the different alleles in the different sites in their genome. So these are three big broad categories. There are lots of instances within each one of them. And as I said, we'll go into more depth about this in future weeks about what are the pros and cons of each of these and how do they work. All right, that's it for this first video. Don't forget the concept check questions, and I'll see you in the next one.